Hello everyone, my name is Walker from Lindalu and Partners in China. I'm a partner and chemistry patent attorney in Lindalu and Partners. I joined in our firm in 2013. Now I have been working here for nearly 10 years. Previously, I worked as a patent examiner in CNIPA for another 10 years. As a senior patent examiner, I was also responsible for patent re-examination, training in-house counsels and entrepreneurs on patents and so on. Now my focus is patent prosecution, which includes the planning of patent portfolios, drafting, prosecution, and so on. I also do a bit of patent validation and litigation. Today, it's an honor for me to speak here and share my topic with you. The topic is best practice to procure a pharmaceutical patent in China. Why I choose this topic? The basic reason is that in recent years, pharmaceutical patent has become a quite hot issue in China. I hope my today's presentation can help you better understand the practice and judgment rules of pharmaceutical patents in our country. Let me start my presentation. At the very beginning, I should make a disclaimer, that is, the content of the current slides only reveals my personal point of view. My presentation mainly involves the following contents. Part 1, characteristics of pharmaceutical patents. Part 2, importance of experimental data. Part 3, updates on post-filing data. And Part 4, typical cases and takeaways. Let's move to Part 1, characteristics of pharmaceutical patents. In this part, I will introduce the subject matters of pharmaceutical patents. I believe all of us are quite familiar with pharmaceuticals because pharmaceuticals are always playing quite an important role in our daily lives and influence the economy to some extent. So I think I don't need to highlight the importance of pharmaceuticals again, but it's necessary for me to introduce the subject matters of pharmaceutical patents. These subject matters mainly include composition, crystal, compound, medical use, formulation, and others. Although pharmaceutical patents have many different kinds of subject matters, pharmaceutical patents have some common characteristics. For instance, it is hard to confirm the chemical structures of pharmaceuticals without experimental results. It is hard to predict the efficacy of pharmaceuticals without experimental results. Experimental results heavily rely on experimental data, and lack of experimental data leads to dilemma. So from this slide, we can see two keywords, experimental result and experimental data. These two keywords constitute two important aspects in pharmaceutical patents in China. Next, here is a question. If we lack experimental data in a pharmaceutical patent, what will happen? This question is often raised by many patent applicants or patentees. They wonder that if there is no or insufficient experimental data in a pharmaceutical patent, what will happen or what should they do? Let's move to part 2, importance of experimental data. In this part, I will answer the above question. In order to demonstrate the answers to the above question, here I will introduce a little bit of famous case in Chinese courts in its history. That is the case at Western. This case was one of top 10 cases in Chinese courts in 2015. Although this case happened in 2015, nearly 7 years ago, this case had established some important judgment rules of pharmaceutical patents in China. The claim 1 of this case involves type 1 crystalline advanced hydrate containing 1 to 8 moles of water. Here we can see a keyword, 1 to 8 moles of water. During the litigation, a disputed point always lies in the moles of water. The SPC believes that A skilled artisan cannot confirm whether the hydrate contains 1 to 8 moles of water due to lack of essential experimental data in original disclosure. This is because in the original disclosure of this case, there is lack of experimental data to demonstrate how many moles of water are really contained in this hydrate. That means there is no any specific data to demonstrate this hydrate really contains 1 to 8 moles of water. So the SPC believes that there is no any basis for the moles of water in original disclosure. Although during the litigation, the patentee submitted post-filing data in order to demonstrate 3 moles of water are contained in this hydrate. The SPC believes that there is no any basis for the moles of water, so the conclusion is that 3 moles of water cannot be determined unambiguously from original disclosure. The final result is that the description is disclosed insufficiently. This case teaches us that pharmaceutical is an experimental science. This characteristic determines that original experimental data is the first essential element, and post-filing data is the second supplementary element. These two data constitute two important factors in pharmaceutical patents in China. Part 3. Updates on post-filing data. Post-filing data has become another hot topic in recent years in China. So, here, I think it's necessary for me to introduce some judgment rules of post-filing data in China. This table shows some changes of examination rules on post-filing data in recent years in China. From this table, we can see that the patent examining guideline in 2017 stipulated that post-filing data should be examined by examiner. This is a general basic rule for post-filing data in Chinese practice. That means patent applicants can submit post-filing data to solve many problems. And whatever the form of post-filing data is, the examiner has the responsibility to examine it. This is a good news for all patent applicants in pharmaceuticals in China. But another point is the below requirement. The requirement stipulates that the technical effect proved by the post-filing data shall be available to skilled artisans from the original disclosure. That means the technical effect proved by the post-filing data should have some basis in the original disclosure. This is a quite important requirement or precondition for the acceptance of post-filing data in China. And this requirement determines whether the examiner accepts or rejects our post-filing data. In 2021, last year, the patent examination guideline on post-filing data had made some small revisions. Specifically, post-filing data which relates to insufficient disclosure, inventiveness, etc. should be examined by examiner. That means we can submit post-filing data to solve many different kinds of problems. This is a good news for us. That means we have more choices or more freedom to submit post-filing data. But the above requirement that I just said is unchanged and also exists. But the above requirement that I just mentioned is unchanged and also exists. That means the technical effect proved by the post-filing data still should have some basis in the original disclosure. Here is a summary of examination rules on post-filing data. Generally speaking, patent applicants can submit post-filing data to solve many different kinds of problems. As a general basic rule, the examiner should examine the data. That means the examiner has a responsibility to do so. An important requirement is that technical effect should be available for original disclosure. Let's move to the last part, typical cases and takeaways. In this part, I will talk about some important cases happened in Chinese practice. For these cases, we can see that under which circumstances the post-filing data will be accepted by the examiner. Case 1. Case 1 is from Patent Examination Guideline. Specifically, the description discloses the blood pressure lowering function of compound A, but no experimental data is disclosed. That means the description literally describes our compound A has some functions, but does not provide any experimental data to further demonstrate how many functions our compounds A have. During the prosecution, the patent applicant submitted post-filing data about this function. The conclusion is that since the function of compound A for lowering blood pressure is disclosed, the technical effect can be proved by post-filing data. This case teaches us that if there is some little description of some functions of our compounds in the original disclosure, we have the chance to submit post-filing data, to submit specific value to further demonstrate our compounds really has these functions, and this post-filing data will be accepted by the examiner. Case 2. This case is also from Patent Examination Guideline. The description discloses compound A has an IC50 value within a range of 10 to 100 nanomoles. During the prosecution, the patent applicant submitted post-filing data, which shows compound A has a 15 nanomoles IC50 value. The conclusion is that since 15 nanomole falls into original range of 10 to 100 nanomoles, the technical effect can be proved by post-filing data. This case teaches us that if in the original disclosure there is a wide numerical range, but we did not disclose any specific value, later on we submitted a post-filing data, and this post-filing data provides one or some specific values which falls into the original wide numerical range. These specific values can be accepted by the examiner because of the wide numerical range disclosure in the original description. Case 3. Case 3 is from SPC. Background part of description recites compound A has high metabolic stability and bioavailability. As we all know, background part does not seem like a very important part because background part always describes the states of prior art rather than the contents of our invention. So in this case, the first instance court believes that technical effect is only resided in background part. A skilled artisan cannot confirm from post-filing data. Generally, the first instance court believes that background part is not an important part. Although technical effects resided in background part, there are still no any basis for these technical effects in background part. However, SPC holds a different opinion. SPC believes that the background part clearly describes the buffering effect. The technical effect can be determined from post-filing data. That means the SPC believes that background part is also an important part of the description. we can find some basis for the technical effects from the background part in the description. From this case, we can see that we can describe some functions in any parts of the description. For example, background part and other parts of the description. But here, from our experience, we still highly recommend you to describe these functions in other parts which are different from background parts. For example, invention, disclosure part, or example part. Because still, some examiners still think that background part is not an important part of the description. Takeaways. From the above slides, we can see that post-filing data shall be examined by examiner or judge. This is a general basic rule in China. But we should keep in mind that examination does not equal to acceptance. Post-filing data is supplementary, not decisive. But when we want to submit post-filing data to demonstrate our technical effects of the invention, it's still worth for us trying. Providing original experimental data is the most effective strategy. This is because original data is first-hand information and is the most convincing from perspectives of Chinese examiners and judges. So we still highly recommend you to research original data as much as possible in original disclosure, although we can submit post-filing data to solve some problems. Finally, I will give the best practice to procure a pharmaceutical patent in China. From the above slide, you can see that original experimental data plus post-filing data constitutes two important factors in pharmaceutical patents. And these two parts also constitutes best practice to procure pharmaceutical patent. This is all of my today's presentation. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I'm very happy to answer these questions.